Welcome back, viewers, to another episode of Environmental History Worth Reading. These are the picks for November 2016. I'm Sean Courage, one of the editors here at niche-canada.org, and I'm joined by our social media editor, Jessica DeWitt.
I'm Jessica DeWitt. I need no other introduction, I guess.
And we're ready to go. You've picked 5 new websites, articles, audio and video selections from what's been shared on online social networks in the environmental history community. And we start with a podcast from the Center for Energy and Environmental Research in the Human Sciences at Rice University called Cultures of Energy, the Energy Humanities Podcast, episode 42.
Yes, I just recently started listening to this podcast and I highly recommend it. It's really great. And in this one, they interview Andrew Matthews, who's an anthropologist who focuses largely on Mexico and the bureaucracy that surrounds forestry in Mexico. And it's a really long interview, so they cover a lot of topics. But for environmental historians, I think the way that he looks at the way in which the state has transformed and changed itself in regards to conservation and forestry is of particular interest. And he looks at the way that communities are able to manage forests because of a political environmental histories. And he looks at the disconnect between what the state says it's doing, its rhetoric, and what's actually happening on the ground. So it's a really great interview, and I recommend listening to it.
This would probably be really helpful too for like our niche members who might be doing Canadian forest history, who might be interested in the comparative information about Mexico. A great podcast. I think there might be something to this podcasting actually, because there's another one. This is one of the episodes of the newly launched Edge Effects podcast. This one featuring an interview with Laurette Savoy.
So Laurette is a geologist, and in her new book, which is called...
We got it over here. Trace. Memory, History, and Race in the American Landscape.
She bridges the personal and the historical, and the interviewer calls it a genealogy informed by landscape, which I thought was a really good way of putting it. And this interview is very interesting, and she just talks about, I mean, the title of it is that the land itself doesn't hate, and I think that's a really great way of looking at nature as a refuge. And she's looking at it particularly as an African-American woman who experienced racism. She's looking at the way that she escaped into nature as a refuge. And also she looks at the landscape and how histories of Black people and other minorities have been erased from the landscape, and she's trying to put those stories back in. And I think it's both a really good addition to the literature and a great podcast to listen to.
And it will hopefully introduce our readers to Edge Effects, which is the digital magazine produced by graduate students at the Center for Culture, History, and Environment at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Ooh, that was a mouthful. On to urban animals. All right. This is a rat buddy in our feature image this month here. Wastable urban animals. This is from the Seedbox blog.
Yes, it's an environmental humanities blog, and the last 3 posts in my picks this month have to do with waste, and I thought this was a nice transition to look at. The author asks, how does one cross the boundaries between being integrated into urban ecologies and becoming disposable as waste? And she specifically looks at rats and the way that we think of them as vermin, and why do we think of them as vermin despite the fact that they're intelligent, they're actually pretty clean, despite the fact that they eat garbage. And she just explores that, and I think it's a interesting way to look at animals and fits well with some of the other literature and animal history that I've been reading lately, including the latest, one of the new collections in the Niche series on metropolitan animals. So,
a great new collection in the Niche series.
Yes.
You've got a pick here from the Atlantic here about the toxic waste drum, this 55-gallon barrel, which in the strapline here is one of the best traveled inventions in human history.
Hmm. Yes, the author argues that along with the landfill and the retention pond, the 55-gallon drum was the waste management technology of the 20th century. So she looks at from its invention to the way it was used with increasingly during
Hmm.
World War II and afterwards with the influx of industrial waste and the rise of industrialization. She looks at like Love Canal and that sort of thing, and the way that it transformed from a useful object to kind of the object of pollution
Yeah.
and of environmental damage. And she says that by the 1980s, the drum was synonymous with hazardous waste and problems of late industrialization.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting way to look at that topic.
You can even see in television and film the degree to which the drum itself became a symbol of toxicity.
Mhm.
We stay with the drum here with a blog post on bombs and biodiversity, blog about toxic legacies of war, and this is about dumping chemical weapons off the Australian coast. This is by Ben Wilkie.
Yes, this blog is really interesting, and it's part of a growing interest in war and environmental history. And basically, he's just talking about the use of chemical weapons initially during World War I and then during World War II. He talks about the testing of these weapons and how that was damaged the environment in Australia as well as hurt a lot of people. And then he talks about after the war how these weapons were placed into drums and then dumped into the oceans, and there they sit, and no one really knows the kind of environmental damage that these drums can wreak on the environment in the future. So interesting fluidity between the topics this month.
So we've got toxic waste, we've got landscapes, we've got energy and forests. We've got podcasts and articles, plenty to chew on over the holiday break. Jessica, thanks for the 5 new picks this month, and viewers will be back in the new year.
Thank you, Sean.